everybody. Back again for another conversation about AI. And this time I am joined by Lou Robey, is somebody that I've known for, it's going to be half a year now, I think. We first met doing a panel at a conference, and then we've done a couple more since. And we've always had a great time and a really interesting conversation about the wonders of AI and the impact on society, the impact on change, the impact on organizations. So today, hopefully, is going to be no different. It's going to be an amazing discussion. So, Lou, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much. I don't know. If I start telling you about myself, I will sound old. 4 decades, dare I say it, in business. Yeah, so I started off on an apprentice scheme. I was one of the first people to kick off my life on the youth training scheme, as it was known, back in 1983. For anyone listening, that makes me old, doesn't it? But I was in the retail army at Marks and Spencer's. I probably stayed within retail for another 10 years after that. And then I went into education and media, actually, ironically. So I went from folding underwear to putting in EPOS and digital systems. So I've actually, interestingly, been involved in technology since the first day it came out. And it's really interesting when I think back, because you and I go to Sainsbury's all the time, or Tesco, or whatever supermarket you go to, and you naturally do the tills. I used to have to actually drag people's hands along the red line to know that they weren't going to burn themselves and have a barcode. So it is interesting that we're here to talk about where we are 4 decades on. So I grew up in the retail army, as I call it. I went on to have work in a small business, then my own business, and then I ended up at the BBC. And I spent 25 years at the BBC as a potted history, head of leadership development, head of BBC for Business, which was the commercial side, actually, which is now known as BBC Studios, where we used to make programs and turn them into training materials and sell them. And then head of leadership development, head of internal communications, and then head of change. And have been responsible for many, many different technology changes, actually, whilst continuing to be live on air. I think delivered the iPlayer, was one of the first team to deliver the iPlayer. So I think I've been fortunate in a very odd way, without being a technical soul at all, to actually be involved in some really historic and pivotal changes. And they were here to talk about AI. But even if we talk about the iPlayer, the concept of me talking to a presenter to tell them that people will be able to pause them, stop them, rewind them live. I just remember their eyes, being totally boggled about, what do you mean they can shut me up, but that sort of thing. So I have been very lucky to be involved in technology changes, probably for the best part of the last 20 years, if not more. And now, And now I am freelance, and I am playing in the marketplace, as you well know, because we keep ending up on panels together. So What am I? I don't know. I'm a keynote speaker, podcaster. And I've just stepped away from helping a business grow, actually. I was brought into Women in Change as the Managing Director of Women in Change, and I was brought in to elevate it and to take it global, which I did. And it's a private networking club for women in business to be elevated into hopefully very senior positions. So where I am now is I'm out in the big bad world talking to you, Ash.
Well, hopefully it's not as big and as bad as you make it out to be talking to me.
I'm sure it's not.
So the key word there is change. And we've spoken about change on different panels, and you've been involved in organizations that are going through change, or maybe you're driving that change. If we start macro, we start to think about society, and we start to think about AI, most broad impact sense. So we have something that in the last couple of years has started to feel to a lot of people like machines are capable of doing some of the things that knowledge workers do. And that's having a ripple effect on how people feel, how people function, and how people treat this particular technology transformation. So how is AI fundamentally changing how people are functioning, how society is functioning, how organizations are functioning, and how people adapt to that change?
It's a great question, and I think it's one that, interestingly, I think there's not one organization now that can escape this question. When we talk about change, if we look at the Blockbusters or the Nokias or whatever, the Blackberries of this world, and any of those things that we've come across in our lifetime, there were changes that went on in industry and in industrial revolutions and things that didn't necessarily affect everybody. This one affects everybody. And what I find really interesting is how many places are not grasping the fact that it affects everyone. So if we take the education system just as an example, they are way behind the curve. I just saw a wonderful podcast this week that Stephen Bartlett was banging on about the fact that schools are probably the highest, educational side is the highest behind what's happening in the AI and change revolution, the industrial revolution of AI. So that's one area that's quite worrying because these are future generations. In terms of how does that fundamentally shape society, I think that every organization now is having to look at its HR policies. It's having to look at reshaping the roles that it needs to do, and it needs to think about how will I adapt to change. And on its lowest, most basic level, having just gone freelance myself, first thing I thought about was, oh, I'm going to need a VA, desperately going to need a VA. Can I afford a VA? Well, actually, I don't need a VA. And that sounds awful because there are many VAs out there that would love work. But now with some of the tools that I've learned about, found out about, actually, I can run so much thicker and faster without a VA. So I think everybody's having to look about keeping the society and the culture that they work in. They're having to think about their policies. They're having to think about the culture that they want to drive in their organizations. And the fact that we have a career for life now, we are having to adapt. We are working longer. I'm a woman who's not going to get her pension till I'm 67 now. I can't retire at 50. That was the goal. I'm way past that, by the way, but I can't retire, haven't retired. If anything, looking at going up. So people have to now start to change their mindset and their thinking about the type of career they might want, and it won't be there. So they're going to have to constantly adapt.
That's interesting. And there are a couple of points. So first of all, I'm going to go out of my way deliberately to disagree with Stephen Bartlett.
Okay, that's fine.
I was, one of the things that I did this week was a very first thing that I've never done this before, but my sister is a science teacher at a secondary school, and they were having a careers fair, and she asked me would I come along and talk about artificial intelligence. And so I had a stand and I had kids coming up to me with questions, and a lot of these kids were doing diverse things. So some of them were doing computer science, some were doing technology, some were in the arts and humanities, performing arts, drama, creative kind of people. And the whole spectrum, it doesn't matter where these kids were coming from in terms of their subject backgrounds, they all had insightful questions. What kinds of jobs are going to be at risk from AI? How do we know if we can trust what's coming out of AI? What are the longer term impacts on society? And these were kids. I say kids, these are, I guess, year 10, 12 kind of children. I have no idea how old that is. I'm going to say 14, 16, something like
year
that.
12? It's older.
The
year 12.
insight.
Yeah.
But my point is, the insightful questions they were coming out with, and they were doing some of this stuff in their computer science classes as well. They were thinking about coding. They were looking at different coding languages and, C# and HTML or JavaScript, all of these things. So just from that one example, my perspective on what you said, that education and schools are behind, I would say I've worked in a lot of corporations where the people are not asking those questions. People are not learning the coding languages. People are not looking at automations in the way that these kids were. Now, I'm not saying by any means that that's indicative of the entire schooling system, nor am I saying that my experience is indicative of the entirety of the corporate landscape. But the example made me pause and made me think, well, how behind are they really? Because they do have curiosity, they have intellect, and they have the willingness to go off and do things. So a little bit of balance.
I think there is balance, of course, in anything that we say, and I wasn't necessarily saying that the whole education system is behind, but I think, well, I'll give you an example of why I think I can challenge you on this, because I last week did a keynote at 3 universities. I was beamed out across 3 universities, right? And this was the learning and development department that was beaming me out across these 3 universities. I won't say what they are because I think for the sake of this podcast, it's not fair. And the first question I asked them is, how many of you think that you're going to have the same career for the rest of your life? 100% of the people put their hands up in the rooms, right? Wow. I was staggered. right? I then went
Yeah.
on to ask the second question. The second question was, how many of you think that your plan won't go to plan and that you might have to rethink the career that you're going to have? Only 2% of that population put their
Wow.
hand up. The third question was, how much do you think AI is going to change the demographic? Nobody actually knew how to answer it.